out on the unforgiving plains, where the sky is a crushing expanse of blue, and the wind whispers tales of ghosts and gold, a single heartbeat can be the difference between life and eternity. This isn't a story you'll find in the history books written in dusty offices back east. This is a story of the land written in blood, sweat, and a love as wild as the territory itself. It's the story of a woman with healing hands, and a homesteader's grit, and a man who fell from the sky like a broken hawk, only to return as the storm. This is the legend of Clara May Thompson, and the chief who claimed her. The sky over the Montana Territory had been the color of a day-old bruise for 3 days straight. Clara May Thompson, a woman carved from the same stubborn rock as the mountains that loomed on the horizon, paid it little mind. Worry was a luxury, and she had fences to mend and a winter to prepare for. At 26, she was a widow, though the word felt too grand for the brief, fever-racked marriage that had left her the sole proprietor of 160 acres of defiant soil. The land was her only true companion, a harsh and demanding partner that offered little comfort but a profound sense of purpose. Her small cabin, built by her late husband Thomas, stood as a lone sentinel against the endless sea of prairie grass. It was her fortress, her world. Inside, the scent of dried herbs, yarrow sage, and willow bark mingled with the smell of wood smoke and coffee. Clara's hands, though calloused from work, were known for their gentle skill. She was a healer, taught by her grandmother, the old ways of the earth, a knowledge that the nearest town of Dusty Providence, a full day's ride away, both respected and whispered about. On the 3rd day of the bruised sky, the storm broke. It wasn't rain, it was a fury, a biblical deluge that turned her dry creek into a roaring, muddy beast, and the wind into a shrieking demon that clawed at the sod roof of her cabin. Her mule Hester brayed nervously from the lean-to, and Clara soothed the animal with a low hum, her hand resting on its trembling flank. For hours the world was nothing but noise and darkness, the wrath of a god she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. When morning finally broke, it was to a world washed clean and utterly broken. The sun, pale and hesitant, revealed a landscape of devastation. A section of her fence was gone, washed away. A young cottonwood she'd babied for 2 years was snapped in half. Cursing under her breath, she pulled on her worn leather boots, grabbed her rifle, a habit in this land, and set out to survey the damage. She followed the path of the new violent gully the flash flood had carved through her lower pasture. It was a raw, red wound in the earth, littered with uprooted sagebrush and debris, and then she saw it. A splash of darkness against the red mud that wasn't rock or root. Her hand tightened on the rifle stock. It could be a cougar, or worse, a bear driven down from the hills by the storm. She approached with the cautious, silent steps of a hunter, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. He was face down in the mud, half submerged in the silty water that still trickled down the gully. He wore the tattered remnants of buckskin leggings and a simple linen shirt now stained dark with mud, and something she recognized instantly, blood. A deep gash, ugly and black, ran across his back, and another marred his temple. His hair, long and black as a raven's wing, was fanned out in the muck. He was an Indian, or at least part Indian, judging by his high cheekbones and the cast of his skin. Clara's mind raced. Common sense, the voice of every settler she'd ever known, screamed at her to turn back. Leave him. He was likely an outlaw, a renegade. Helping him could bring the tribe down on her, or worse, the kind of white men who hunt men like him for sport or bounty. Sheriff Brody in Providence was a decent man, but he was one man against a territory teeming with shadows. She raised her rifle, the cold metal a familiar weight. One shot and the problem would be gone. No one would ever know. It would be a mercy, perhaps. But then a sound. A low, guttural groan, a flicker of life in the ruined flesh. He was alive. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, a gentle whisper from years ago. Life is life, little bird. You don't ask its name or its history. If it's struggling, you lend it a hand. Clara lowered the rifle, her resolve hardening into something different. She was a healer. She couldn't watch a man die in a ditch no matter who he was. Damn the consequences. Damn the whispers. With a strength born of necessity, she heaved him over. His face was a mask of mud and blood, but his features were strong, sharp as a hawk's. A jagged cut ran from his eyebrow to his cheekbone, perilously close to his eye. His breathing was a shallow, rattling thing. He was burning with fever. Getting him back to the cabin was a monumental struggle. He was heavy, all lean muscle and bone, a dead weight against her smaller frame. She half dragged, half carried him, her boots sinking in the mud, her muscles screaming in protest. Every step was a battle. By the time she hauled him onto the coarse blanket of her cot, the pale morning sun was high in the sky, and she was slick with sweat and his blood. She worked with a feverish intensity, stripping away his ruined clothes, her healer's mind, overriding any sense of modesty. The wound on his back was a deep cut, likely from a knife already festering. There were bruises mottling his ribs and torso, the distinct, ugly marks of a severe beating. And then there was the bullet wound in his thigh, raw and angry. He hadn't just been caught in the storm, he had been hunted. For the next 2 days, Clara was a ghost in her own home, moving between the hearth where she brewed her poultices and the cot where the stranger wrestled with death. She cleaned his wounds with boiled water, and willow bark tea packed the deepest one with a paste of yarrow to staunch the bleeding and fight the infection, and forced sips of fever-reducing brew between his cracked lips. He drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering in a language she didn't understand, a language of soft consonants and hard guttural stops, the Lakota tongue. Once his eyes dark and fathomless as a midnight sky snapped open and focused on her. There was no fear in them, only a raw animal intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He tried to rise a snarl on his lips, but collapsed back, his body betraying him. "Easy now," she murmured, placing a cool, damp cloth on his forehead. "You're safe here. Just rest." He stared at her, his gaze sharp and intelligent, even through the haze of pain. He understood her English. He said nothing, his eyes tracking her every move as she tended to him until the fever pulled him back under. In that brief, lucid moment, Clara Thompson knew one thing for certain: she had not dragged a common drifter into her home. She had brought in a wolf, and she had no idea what would happen when he was strong enough to stand on his own. The stranger's fever broke on the 5th day. The storm in his body subsided, leaving behind a profound weakness and a heavy, watchful silence. He was awake, more than he was asleep now, his dark eyes following Clara as she moved about the small cabin. He never spoke a word. Clara, in turn, gave him his space. She'd leave a bowl of thin broth and a cup of water on the small crate beside his cot and retreat to her chores, always aware of his gaze on her back. The silence between them was a living thing, thick with unspoken questions. She knew he was assessing her, judging her motives, and she was doing the same. She learned the rhythm of his pain. A slight tightening of his jaw meant the wound in his thigh was throbbing. A faint sheen of sweat on his brow meant the fever was threatening to return. She would tend to him without a word, changing the dressing on his back, applying a fresh, comfrey poultice to his leg. He accepted her care with a stoic grace. never flinching, though she knew the sting of the herbal cleansers must be agonizing. One afternoon, as she was grinding dried herbs with a mortar and pestle, he spoke. His voice was a low rasp, rough from disuse. "Why?" Clara paused, her hands still. She turned to face him. He had pushed himself up into a sitting position, his bare torso crisscrossed with the evidence of his ordeal. He looked leaner, but the raw power in his frame was still evident. "Why what?" she asked, her tone even. "Why help me?" He clarified his English, clear, with only a slight musical cadence that betrayed another tongue. "They would have paid you for my scalp." The bluntness of his statement startled her. "I'm not a bounty hunter," she said simply. "And I'm not in the habit of letting men die in my pasture, no matter who they are." He studied her face for a long moment, searching for something she couldn't name. "You are alone here. A woman alone. It is not a safe choice." "I haven't had the luxury of safe choices for a long time," she replied, turning back to her herbs. The conversation felt over. But it wasn't. It was a beginning. He began to speak more, a few words at a time. He told her his name was Jed. Just Jed. He offered no surname, no history, and she did not ask for one. She told him her name was Clara May. The threat from the outside world began to creep in. A week into Jed's recovery, a rider came. It was Silas Blackwood's man, a burly, unpleasant fellow named Cobb. Blackwood was a cattle baron who was slowly swallowing up all the small homesteads in the valley, his greed as vast as the plains themselves. He'd made offers for Clara's land, before offers she'd firmly refused. Her 160 acres were strategically vital. They contained the only reliable year-round spring in the area, the headwaters of Cottonwood Creek. Cobb dismounted without being invited, his eyes lingering on Clara in a way that made her skin crawl. "Mr. Blackwood sent me to see if the storm changed your mind," he said, spitting a brown stream of tobacco juice near her porch steps. "He's upping his offer. $500. More than this scrap heap is worth. The land is not for sale." "Cobb," Clara said, her voice cold. Her hand rested on the doorframe, inches from where the shotgun leaned. Cobb's eyes narrowed, sweeping over the cabin. "You all alone out here, Mrs. Thompson? A storm, a fire? Anything could happen. Be a shame for a pretty thing like you to lose everything." The threat was unmistakable. Before she could reply, a low voice came from the shadowed doorway of the cabin. "She is not alone." Cobb started his hand, instinctively going to the pistol at his hip. Jed stood in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. He was wearing a pair of Thomas's old trousers, which were too short but functional. He was still gaunt, but his presence was formidable. His eyes fixed on Cobb were like chips of obsidian. Cobb's bravado faltered. He looked from the imposing figure of Jed to Clara and back again. "Who the hell are you? I'm the man who's telling you to get off this land." Jed said, his voice quiet, but carrying the clear promise of violence. Cobb hesitated, then seemed to decide it wasn't a fight worth having today. He smirked. "Blackwood gets what he wants, sooner or later." He swung himself back onto his horse and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and menace in his wake. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She turned to Jed, who was already retreating into the cabin, his energy spent. "Thank you," she said, following him in. "But you shouldn't have. He'll tell Blackwood." "Let him," Jed said, easing himself back onto the cot. "That man is a snake. You do not give land with a spring like yours to a snake." He knew about the spring. He was observant, missing nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, Jed healed with remarkable speed. He began to help with the chores, his movements still stiff, but growing stronger each day. He repaired the fence Cobb's master had threatened his hands, surprisingly deft. He chopped wood, his breath misting in the crisp autumn air, the rhythmic thud of the axe a reassuring sound. They fell into a comfortable domestic silence. They rarely spoke of the future or the past. But in the quiet evenings, sitting by the fire, a bond was forged. She would read from her worn copy of Shakespeare, a gift from a father she barely remembered, and he would listen his expression unreadable. He in turn would take a piece of scrap wood and a small knife and carve. He carved with an unnerving precision, his hands transforming the wood into the shape of a soaring falcon, its wings outstretched. The day he was well enough to leave, a coolness had returned to the air between them. The easy companionship was replaced by the tension of impending departure. He had fashioned a crutch for himself and had mended his tattered clothes as best he could. He stood by the door, the morning sun casting a long shadow behind him. He turned to face her, and for the first time, Clara felt a pang of loss that was sharp and unexpected. "I have no money to pay you," he said. "I didn't ask for any," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. "A debt is a debt. It will be paid." He held out the small wooden falcon he had carved. It was exquisite, every feather detailed its eyes, seeming to hold a fierce intelligence. "So you will remember." She took at her fingers, brushing his. His skin was warm, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I won't forget, Jed." He held her gaze for a heartbeat longer. "The snake Blackwood. He will not stop. Be careful, Clara May." And then he was gone. He walked out into the vast emptiness of the prairie and didn't look back, his lone figure shrinking against the horizon until the land swallowed him whole. Clara stood in the doorway for a long time, the small wooden falcon clutched in her hand, a profound and unsettling quiet descending upon her home once more. She was alone again, but something had changed. The silence now had a shape, and it was the shape of the man who had just left. Jed's absence left a void that Clara hadn't anticipated. The cabin felt too big, the silence too loud. The rhythmic thud of his axe was gone, replaced by the lonely sigh of the wind. She threw herself into her work, trying to bury the unease that had taken root in her heart. But his warning about Silas Blackwood echoed in her thoughts, a constant low hum of anxiety. Blackwood did not wait long. A week after Jed's departure, the pressure began in earnest. It wasn't overt, not at first. It was a war of 1,000 cuts. A delivery of feed she'd ordered from Providence never arrived. When she rode into town, the merchant, Mr. Abernathy, a man she'd known for years, couldn't meet her eye. He mumbled something about the wagon breaking an axle, but his shifty gaze told her the truth. Blackwood had gotten to him. Then, part of her herd, 5 precious cattle, went missing. She spent 2 days searching her hope, dwindling with the setting sun each evening. She found them on the 3rd day, or what was left of them. They had been shot and left to rot in a shallow ravine just beyond her property line. It was a message cruel and clear. Clara rode to Providence. Her jaw set her heart, a cold, hard knot in her chest. She stormed into Sheriff Brody's office, the smell of stale cigar smoke and dust assaulting her. Brody was a man worn down by the vastness of his jurisdiction and the smallness of his authority. "He killed my cattle, Sheriff," Clara declared, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "Silas Blackwood is trying to starve me out." Sheriff Brody sighed, running a weary hand over his face. "My Clara, you got any proof? Did you see Cobb or any of his men do it? Who else would it be? You know what he's doing. He's done the same to the Millers and the Jensens." "Knowing and proving are 2 different things," Brody said, his voice laced with resignation. "Blackwood's got friends in the territorial capital. His lawyers can tie a man in knots. I can't go up against him with just your word, girl. My hands are tied." Defeated, Clara rode home, the bitterness of injustice a sour taste in her mouth. The law was a distant concept out here, a faint whisper against the roar of greed and power. She was truly on her own. The harassment escalated. One night she was jolted awake by the smell of smoke. Rushing outside, she saw one of her haystacks engulfed in flames, the fire greedily eating the winter feed for her remaining animals. She managed to save the barn, but the loss was devastating. A few days later, she found the well for her cabin, fouled the water, tainted with the carcass of a dead coyote. She was forced to haul water from the spring, a half-mile trek each and every day. Clara grew thinner, her face etched with exhaustion and worry, but her spirit refused to break. She became as nocturnal as the owls in her barn patrolling her property at night, with her shotgun, her senses on high alert. Sleep became a stolen luxury, a few hours snatched before dawn. She was a prisoner on her own land. The final straw came in the form of a legal notice delivered by a smirking cob. It was a formal accusation of water theft filed by Silas Blackwood. He claimed that her spring, the very source of Cottonwood Creek, was being illegally diverted, and that she was stealing water that rightfully flowed to his massive ranch downstream. It was a ludicrous claim, a twisted piece of legal fiction, but it carried the weight of the territorial court. She was being summoned to a hearing in Helena, a journey she couldn't afford to make, and a legal battle she had no hope of winning. The document stated that if she did not comply or cease her theft, Mr. Blackwood would be within his legal rights to remedy the situation himself. It was a death warrant for her homestead, wrapped in the sanctimonious language of the law. That evening, as a cold, indifferent moon rose in the sky, Clara sat on her porch, the shotgun across her lap, the legal notice crumpled in her fist. The fight had gone out of her. They had cut her off, bled her dry, and now they were coming for the kill. Tears of frustration and helplessness finally welled in her eyes, blurring the vast, lonely expanse of the prairie. She had held on for so long, but the noose had finally tightened. She had nothing left. As she stared out into the encroaching darkness, a movement caught her eye. On the ridge to the west, a silhouette appeared against the fading light. A lone rider on a horse, then another, and another. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was Blackwood's men. They were coming to finish it. She raised the shotgun, her hands trembling, and peered into the twilight, trying to gauge their numbers. 10, 20. More. It was a small army. This wasn't an eviction. It was an annihilation. But as they drew closer, moving with a silent, disciplined grace that was unlike Cobb's clumsy thugs, she saw they were not the men she expected. They were Indians. Warriors, painted and armed, their figures lean and formidable in the dying light. They moved like a single flowing river down the ridge and into her valley. At their head rode a man who sat his horse with an easy commanding authority. He was not wearing tattered buckskin now. He wore a chief's war shirt, adorned with intricate quill work and a breastplate of polished bone. A single eagle feather was tied in his long black hair. He rode directly towards her cabin, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on her. He halted his horse a dozen yards from her porch, the army of warriors fanning out behind him in a silent, intimidating crescent. The setting sun glinted off the barrel of Clara's shotgun, but she did not lower it. The rider dismounted his movements, fluid and powerful. He walked towards her, stopping at the bottom of her porch steps. The man she had known as Jed was gone. In his place stood a leader, a chief radiating an aura of power that was breathtaking. He looked at her tear-streaked face at the shotgun held in a white-knuckled grip at the crumpled legal notice on the floor beside her. His gaze took it all in. "I told you a debt would be paid. Clara May," he said, his voice the same low timbre she remembered, but now it held the resonance of command. "This land is under my protection, now. And so are you." Clara stared at him bewildered. Who are you?" He looked back at the formidable force of warriors behind him, then met her eyes again. "My name is Kangi Chaitan, Crow Falcon, and these are my warriors. The snake will not have this land. I have come to claim what is mine." Her confusion deepened. "What is yours? This is my land." His gaze was intense, unwavering, and it pinned her in place. "To protect you. And this spring, there can be no question of your allegiance. No question of my right to be here. From this day forward, in the eyes of my people and in the eyes of the white man, you will be my wife." The words hung in the air, heavier and more shocking than the silence that followed. "You will be my wife." It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration, delivered with the same unyielding force as the land itself. Clara's mind reeled. The man she had nursed, the quiet carver she had known as Jed, was this powerful, imposing figure, Kangi Chaitan. A chief, the exhausted, vulnerable man was gone, replaced by a leader with an army at his back, and he was standing on her porch, claiming her as he would a piece of territory. "My wife," she stammered, the shotgun suddenly feeling flimsy and useless in her hands. "You can't be serious. You can't just ride in here and—" "I can—" he interrupted, his voice calm but absolute. "Blackwood understands one thing, strength. He will send hired guns. He will use his false laws. He will not stop until he has this land, or you are dead. Alone you will lose. But the wife of a Lakota chief, the land of a chief's wife, that is a different war. He will be attacking my people. That is a war he cannot win." His logic was brutal and terrifyingly clear. He was offering her a shield, the only shield that might actually work against a man like Silas Blackwood. But the cost was her freedom, her identity, to become Mrs. Kangi Chaitan. The very idea was absurd, impossible. "I don't even know you," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a bewildering mix of fear and a strange, unwelcome flicker of security. "You know me better than anyone," he said, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "You saw me when I was worth less than the mud I was lying in. You gave me back my life, Clara May. I will not stand by and watch it be taken from you." He took a step closer, and she flinched. He stopped immediately, holding up a hand. "This is not what you think. It is a bargain, an alliance. I will give you my name and the protection of my warriors. This cabin, this land will remain yours. In return, my people will have access to the sacred spring of my mother's ancestors, the water that Blackwood seeks to control." He gestured toward the spring, and for the first time Clara understood. It wasn't just about the water. It was about heritage. Your mother's ancestors. She was of the Minikovoju, who lived in these hills long before the first white man came. They called this spring Mniwichoni, water of life. It is a place of healing, a place for visions. Blackwood wants to damn it to own it. To my people, that is a sacrilege. He looked at her then, and his eyes held a history of loss and defiance. You are a healer. You of all people should understand. He was right. She did understand. She understood the sanctity of a place, the importance of roots. She had fought for her own small patch of earth with that same fierce devotion. Behind him, his warriors sat on their horses, silent and patient, their faces like stone masks in the twilight. They were waiting for her answer, The entire valley seemed to be holding its breath. She looked at the crumpled notice on the floor, a symbol of her complete and utter defeat. She thought of her dead cattle, her burned hay, her poisoned well. She thought of Sheriff Brody's tired, helpless face. She was checkmated with only one move left on the board. It was a terrifying, unknown move, but it was the only one that wasn't a surrender. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned the shotgun against the cabin wall. She bent down and picked up the crumpled legal notice, smoothing it out, before tearing it into 4 neat pieces and letting them flutter from her fingers like dead leaves. She straightened up and met Kangi Chaitan's gaze, her own clear and steady. "All right, Chief," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "You have yourself a bride." A low murmur rippled through the warriors behind him. Kangi Chaitan's stoic expression didn't change, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, relief perhaps, or respect. He nodded once. "It is done." That night the valley was transformed. The Lakota set up a camp of teepees near the creek, their fires twinkling like a new constellation in the darkness. The air, once filled with Clara's lonely silence, now hummed with the soft sounds of a living community, the murmur of voices, the nicker of horses, the cry of a child. Clara remained in her cabin, a stranger in her own home. Kangi Chaitan had 2 of his warriors stand guard on her porch. He himself did not enter her cabin again that night. He gave her space, but his presence was everywhere. It was in the sentries outlined by the firelight, in the disciplined order of the camp, in the sudden, profound safety that enveloped her homestead. She was no longer alone. She was protected. She was also claimed. Lying in her bed, clutching the small wooden falcon he had given her, Clara May Thompson stared into the darkness and wondered what manner of life she had just agreed to. She had traded one kind of war for another. She had made a bargain with a chief to save her land, but she feared she may have just lost herself. The next morning, Clara awoke to a world irrevocably changed. The first thing she saw when she opened her door was not the empty expanse of her valley, but the bustling life of the Lakota camp. Women were tending fires, children were laughing and chasing dogs, and men were tending to their horses. It was a living, breathing community that had sprung up on her land overnight. Kangi Chaitan arrived as the sun cleared the eastern ridge. He was not alone. With him was an older woman with a face like a beautiful weathered map, her grey hair in 2 long braids. Her eyes were kind, but missed nothing. "Clara May," Chaitan said, his tone formal. "This is Kanku Luta, Win Red Road woman. She is my father's sister. She will help you." Clara bristled slightly. "Help me with what?" The older woman smiled, a gentle, knowing expression. "To become a Lakota wife," she said in surprisingly clear English. She held out a bundle wrapped in soft deer hide. "There will be a ceremony this evening. You must be prepared." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. A ceremony. It was all happening so fast, a current pulling her along before she could find her footing. She took the bundle and retreated into the cabin, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside was a dress of the softest, whitest doeskin she had ever touched. It was exquisitely made, decorated with intricate patterns of blue and red beads and delicate porcupine quills. It was beautiful, and it felt utterly alien. Putting it on, she felt like an actress in a play she hadn't rehearsed. The soft leather was a second skin so different from her coarse calico dresses. Red Road woman came into the cabin and silently helped Clara braid her blonde hair, weaving in a single striking blue feather. She painted 2 small vertical red lines on Clara's cheeks, symbols of life and commitment. As she worked, she spoke in a low, soothing voice. "Kangi Chaitan does not do this lightly," she said. He was raised in 2 worlds. He walked the white man's road in a mission school until he was a man. He learned your tongue, your laws. But his heart is Lakota. His mother was my sister. She was killed by men like Blackwood, who see the land only for what they can take, not what it is. The story settled a piece of the puzzle into place for Clara. It explained his fluency, his understanding of her world, and the deep personal nature of this fight. Why was he so badly injured? Clara asked quietly. When I found him. Red Road Woman's face hardened. There are rivals within our own people, men who think his white blood makes him weak. A man named Matto the Bear believes he should be chief. He and his followers ambushed Chaitan. They left him for dead. They did not know his spirit is as strong as the falcon he is named for, or that a white woman with a healer's spirit would find him. The ceremony was held at dusk by the sacred spring. The entire tribe gathered their faces, illuminated by the flickering light of a large bonfire. The air was thick with the scent of burning sage and cedar. Chaitan stood waiting for her, dressed not in his war shirt, but in ceremonial buckskins that matched her own. He looked every inch the chief, a bridge between the ancient world and the violent present. There were no vows as she knew them. A tribal elder, the holy man, spoke in the Lakota tongue, his voice a rhythmic chant. He held a pipe with a stone bowl towards the sky, the earth, and the 4 directions. He offered a prayer to Wakantanka, the Great Spirit. Then Red Road Woman brought forward a single buffalo robe. She draped it over both Clara's shoulders and Chaitan's, binding them together. Under the robe, in the small, intimate space it created, they were alone in the crowd. He was so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him. He looked down at her, his dark eyes searching her face in the firelight. This binds us, Clara May. He murmured his voice for her ears only. In the eyes of my people you are now one of us. Your enemies are my enemies. Your home is my home. The weight of the robe of the moment, of the hundreds of eyes upon them, was immense. This was no longer just a practical arrangement. It was a solemn spiritual pact. When the elder finished his prayer, a cheer went up from the tribe. The bargain was sealed. Life became a delicate dance of 2 worlds. Clara continued to live in her cabin, but Kangi Chaitan moved in with her. It was a chaste, respectful arrangement. He took the floor, rolling himself in a buffalo hide near the hearth, giving her the privacy of her bed. Yet his presence filled the small space. She was acutely aware of the sound of his breathing in the dark, of his shadow moving in the early morning light. Their days were spent in a strange, shared routine. He would rise before dawn to meet with his warriors, his voice a low rumble outside her window. She would milk her cow and tend her garden now, with the quiet assistance of Lakota women who showed her how to grind corn and find edible roots she had never known existed. The evenings were when the wall between them felt thinnest. They would share a simple meal, often a stew made with vegetables from her garden and venison provided by his hunters. He would watch her as she read by the firelight, and she would find herself watching him as he sharpened his knife or repaired a piece of tack, his hands strong and capable. One evening he noticed the small wooden falcon sitting on her mantelpiece. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "You kept it?" He said, a statement, not a question. "You told me to," she replied, "so I would remember." "And did you?" "I never forgot." She admitted, her voice quiet. He placed the carving back on the mantel and looked at her, his gaze holding a new depth. "My life began again in this room, Clara May, under your hands. That is a thing a man does not forget." In that moment, the chief and the homesteader disappeared, and they were just a man and a woman, bound by a history of violence and healing. The marriage that had begun as a strategic alliance, a bargain of land and protection, was slowly, quietly beginning to feel like something else entirely. It was a fragile shoot, pushing its way up through the hard, unyielding ground of necessity, reaching for an unknown sun. Silas Blackwood was not a man to be deterred by a show of force. He was a creature of patience and cunning. When word reached him of the Lakota encampment and the so-called marriage, he did not fly into a rage. He smiled. The situation had become more complicated, but also more interesting. An open fight against a unified tribe was costly, but a serpent does not need to fight a wolf pack head-on. It need only bite the leader. Blackwood sent for the one man he knew would share his goal, Matto, the bear. The meeting took place under a moonless sky, far from both the homestead and the Lakota camp. Matto arrived with two of his most loyal followers, his face a mask of bitter pride. He was a large, powerful man who saw Kangi Chaitan's white blood as a stain on their people. "Your first attempt to kill him failed," Blackwood said, not bothering with pleasantries. He sat on his horse, a silhouette of wealth and menace. "The spirits were not with us that day," Matto growled. "He was saved by a white witch." "Indeed. And now he's married her, claiming the land and the spring," Blackwood said, a sneer in his voice. "He uses her white skin as a shield. He dishonors your people." He was stoking a fire that already burned hot. Matto's hatred for Chaitan was a palpable thing. "He turns our warriors into fence posts for a homesteader," Matto spat. "He grows soft. Then we must give him a reason to prove his strength." Blackwood proposed his plan already formed. A reason to leave the safety of his new bride's skirts. There is a boy in Providence, the baker's son, Sammy. The woman, Clara, is fond of him. She trades her remedies for his mother's bread. Matto listened, his eyes gleaming with understanding. "My men will grab the boy," Blackwood continued. "We will let word reach the camp that he is being held in the old abandoned mine in the Black Hills, a place your people avoid. They say it is haunted." "It is a place of bad spirits," Matto confirmed. "Exactly. Chaitan will have to go after him. He cannot look weak in front of his new wife. He will take his best warriors. When he does, you will strike. You will tell the others that Chaitan has abandoned them to save a white boy, that his loyalty is to her, not to the tribe. You will challenge his authority. While his camp is in chaos, my men will be waiting for him at the mine. It's a perfect trap. He'll be caught between your ambition and my rifles." The plan was devious and deadly, a two-headed serpent designed to strike from all directions. Matto agreed. His honor had long been choked out by his ambition. A few days later, the news arrived as Blackwood had planned. A frantic rider from Providence brought word that young Sammy had been snatched while playing near the edge of town. A ransom note left by renegades demanded Chaitan himself come to the old Nightfall mine if he wanted to see the boy alive again. The mood in the camp grew tense. To risk the chief for a white child was a contentious issue. Clara was distraught. Sammy was a bright, sweet boy who often helped her carry her supplies. She felt a sickening wave of guilt. The boy had been taken to get to her, to get to Chaitan. "It's a trap," she insisted, her voice tight with panic as she spoke to Chaitan in the privacy of the cabin. "Blackwood is behind this. He's trying to draw you out." "I know," Chaitan said, his face grim. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements economical and precise. "Then you can't go. It's what he wants." "And what of the boy?" He countered, his gaze locking with hers. "Do we leave him to the mercy of a man like Blackwood? What kind of protectors would we be then?" This is not just about land, Clara May. It is about the kind of people we are. He stood, his decision made. I will take 10 of my best men. We ride at once. She saw the unshakable resolve in his eyes. He was a chief, and a chief protects the helpless. But she also saw the dissent brewing in the camp. As Chaitan chose his warriors, she saw Matto speaking in low, urgent tones to a group of others, his gestures angry and dismissive. The serpent's venom was already at work. As Chaitan prepared to mount his horse, Clara rushed to his side. "This mine," she said, her mind racing. "I know it. Thomas prospected there once. He said it was a maze, but there's a back entrance, an old air shaft up on the ridge above it. It's hidden by a rock slide, hard to find, unless you know where to look." Chaitan paused, his full attention on her. "You can find it." "I can," she said without hesitation. "Let me come with you. I can guide you." He looked at her, then at the concerned faces of his warriors. Taking a woman, his wife, into a trap was unthinkable. "No, it is too dangerous." "It is more dangerous to walk into Blackwood's trap blind," she argued fiercely. "He will expect you at the front entrance. He will never expect you to come from behind, from above. It is your only advantage. My knowledge of this land is as good a weapon as your rifle. Use it." He saw the fire in her eyes, the same unbreakable grit he had seen when she faced down Cobb on her porch. She was not a fragile liability. She was a partner in this fight. The marriage of convenience had forged a warrior. His decision was swift. "Very well," he said, turning to one of his most trusted warriors, a man named Tashunka, or his horse. "Tashunka, you will remain here. You will watch Matto. Keep the camp secure." He then looked at Clara. "Ride with me." As the small war party thundered out of the valley, heading towards the looming darkness of the Black Hills, they were unaware of the 2 sets of eyes watching them from a high ridge. One belonged to Matto, his face alight with triumphant hatred. The other belonged to Cobb, who lowered his spyglass and spurred his horse, riding hard to tell Silas Blackwood that the bait had been taken. The trap was about to be sprung. Under the cloak of darkness, Clara led the Lakota war party up a treacherous ridge overlooking the Nightfall mine. She located the hidden air shaft, a dark moor, concealed by a long-forgotten rock slide. "He'll expect you at the front," she whispered to Kanji Chaitan. "He'll never expect you from above." Trusting her, Chaitan led his warriors into the earth's belly. They moved like specters through the oppressive blackness, emerging into a side tunnel overlooking the main cavern. Below, 5 of Blackwood's thugs played cards by a fire, while a terrified Sammy was tied to a support beam. Their stealth was perfect until a single loose stone skittered away, alerting the guards. With a furious war cry, Chaitan and his men descended upon them like striking hawks. The cavern became a whirlwind of brutal combat. As the warriors engaged the gunmen, Clara sprinted for the boy, her knife ready. But before she could reach him, Silas Blackwood's foreman, Cobb, emerged from the shadows, grabbing her and pressing a pistol to her temple. "Call him off, Chief," Cobb roared, "or your bride dies." The fighting stopped. Chaitan stood frozen, his face a mask of cold fury. In that terrifying standoff, Clara acted. She stomped her heel down hard on Cobb's instep, causing him to grunt in pain and loosen his grip for a heartbeat. It was all the opening Chaitan needed. He didn't throw his tomahawk at Cobb, but at a rotting support beam above him. The blade struck true, and with a groan of stressed timber, the cavern roof began to collapse. As Cobb scrambled away in terror, Chaitan lunged, pulling Clara and Sammy into a side tunnel, just as tons of rock crashed down, sealing the cavern. They found another way out, and rode like the wind back to the homestead, where their return was not a moment too soon. The traitorous Matto had used Chaitan's absence to attempt a coup, but his grab for power was interrupted by the arrival of Blackwood himself, leading a charge of 20 men against the divided camp. Just as Blackwood's men surged forward, Chaitan and his warriors crested the ridge, appearing like avenging spirits. The sight of their victorious chief with the rescued boy galvanized the tribe. The warriors who had wavered turned on Matto, their loyalty instantly restored. The battle was short and decisive. Blackwood, caught completely by surprise, was defeated and captured. As the dust settled, Chaitan stood with Clara by the sacred spring. He gently touched a bruise on her cheek. "You were brave today, Clara May," he said, his voice filled with a profound respect that went far beyond their initial bargain. "We were brave," she replied, meeting his gaze. Together. In the crucible of fire and steel, their alliance had been forged into something real, a bond as deep and true as the life-giving water at their feet. And so, in the heart of the Wild West, a new legend was born. The story of the homesteader and the chief became a whisper on the wind, a tale told around campfires. Silas Blackwood's empire crumbled, his greed undone not by armies or laws, but by the unbreakable bond of two people from different worlds who found a common home. Kangi Chaitan and Clara May ruled their valley not as chief and wife, but as partners. She brought her healing and knowledge of the white man's world. He brought the strength and wisdom of his people. Together they created a sanctuary, a place where two cultures could meet, not in conflict, but in mutual respect. Theirs was not a simple romance. It was a testament to the fact that the strongest alliances are forged in fire, and the truest love is a debt of life paid back with a lifetime of devotion. A love as enduring as the land itself. What did you think of Clara's incredible courage? Do you believe a love born of necessity can become something more? Let us know in the comments below. If you are captivated by this story of the untamed heart of the American West, be sure to hit that like button. Share it with a friend who loves epic tales, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss another story from the frontier. Thank you for listening.